Hello everyone and welcome to my presentation. Today we're going to discuss an article written by Lorena Llosa and issued in 2011. This article is called Standards-Based Classroom Assessment. With the United States adoption of standards-based approach to education, most attention has focused on the large-scale, high-stakes assessments intended to measure students' mastery of standards for accountability purposes. Meanwhile, less attention has been paid to the role of standards-based assessment in the classroom. The purpose of this research is to discuss key issues and challenges related to the use of standards-based classroom assessment to assess English language learners' proficiency. In the first part of the paper, it describes a study of standards-based classroom assessment of English proficiency in a large urban school district in California. The second part of the paper highlights the major issues and challenges involved in using English proficiency standards as the basis of classroom assessment. Further on in the paper, there are a few suggestions given for future directions for research in the field of standards-based classroom assessments. Teachers were expected to score student progress towards each standard using the scale you can see on the slide to account the overall performance of the student in the class. The drawback of this study was that overall teachers tend to be the best judges of students' proficiency. However, they interpreted the standards themselves and were not usually able to give a reasonable score for students, not to act as their executors. The fact that the teachers are good judges of students' language ability suggests that scores can be used to make overall summative decisions. So this study brings us to the issues and challenges involved into standards-based classroom assessment in language proficiency. The analysis of these issues is organized around three interrelated components: the teacher, the assessment purpose, and the standards. We have already raised the question of variability in the ways teachers interpret and use standards. It can have important implications regarding the reliability and validity of the inferences teachers make about their students' language ability, as well as on the validity of the decisions made on the basis of those inferences. The variability can be attributed in part to lack of professional development. The article argues that unless greater attention is given to providing adequate time allocation and appropriate forms of professional development, the many potential benefits of involving teachers in assessment will not be realized. One of the most frequently discussed tensions surrounding classroom assessment has to do with assessment purpose. It is very important to differentiate between summative and formative assessment. The English language development is mainly focused on formative assessment, but it oftentimes gets misinterpreted. Formative assessment is typically defined as assessment that yields information that can help students guide their own subsequent learning, and teachers modifying teaching methods and materials so as to make them more appropriate for students' needs, interests, and capabilities. Summative assessment, on the other hand, provides useful information of students' achievement or progress at the end of a course of study. However, district administrators are only interested in getting from the teacher one score that would tell them whether a particular student could be moved from one level to the next. They are not particularly interested in the extent to which a student had mastered a specific standard or the progress that a student had made towards mastery of a standard. Both of these challenges discussed are related to standards, but now we will examine standards-based classroom assessment in relation to the operational definition of the English proficiency construct, since that's what English language proficiency standards represent. One of the main criticisms of English language proficiency standards across multiple contexts has been that they lack empirical foundation. Standards documents are typically developed by groups of teachers and experts in a particular context based on their experience and intuition. Thus, they may lack clarity and internal coherence. Another issue here might be that in this situation, both the classroom assessment and the standardized tests are aligned to the same standards, and mastery of those standards is judged based on the same criteria. The increasing interest in formative assessment has prompted the test publishing companies to develop standard-based assessment for classroom to help teachers monitor the students' progress towards mastering the standards. The Race to the Top assessment program has funded 2 state consortia to develop new assessment systems that measure student skills against the Common Core standards. The caution, however, is that the types of assessment produced by these companies and proposed in the state consortia's assessment systems cannot be considered formative. The WIDA consortium, however, that we are all familiar with, is working on the assessment system that includes formative classroom assessment. This kind of assessment includes benchmark assessments, classroom-based assessment templates, and student self-assessment. Another area of important development is English language proficiency standards. The ELP standards developed by WIDA consortium address assessment purpose and are based on a different conceptualization of academic English proficiency. Future research on SBCA is needed in 5 interrelated areas. First, studies should focus on the nature of post-No Child Left Behind English language proficiency standards, specifically whether and how this operationalization of the academic English construct impacts SBCA practices. Second, regardless of the nature of the ELP standards, there is a need for descriptive studies that document how teachers use standards as the basis for classroom assessment, whether they develop the assessments themselves, rely on templates that are provided to them, or use commercially available products. Third, in addition to descriptive studies that capture authentic assessment in practices in classrooms, research should be designed that systematically and experimentally examines the impact of different SBCA practices on teachers and students. Fourth, these studies need to be guided by appropriate validation framework that take into account assessment purpose. Finally, an important line of research should be focused on teachers' knowledge and professional development needs. No Child Left Behind standards were linking language proficiency with the content area, which might have been challenging to teachers. The WIDA resource guide explains content topics are intended to illustrate how language lessons can be embedded in context and are not meant to imply that language learning is automatic when content topics are taught. The issue is who among all the teachers who interact with English language learners will be responsible for instructing and assessing students on the basis of ELP standards. Also, in order to effectively instruct and assess students using the standards, ESL teachers will have to know what is expected of students in all content areas. Much work is needed that examines how the nature of these ELP standards will affect SBCA practices in schools. Observational and descriptive studies are needed to document the extent to which SBCAs are used by teachers and how. More specifically, how do teachers go about developing classroom assessment to assess students' mastery of ELP standards? Students could investigate how much these various forms of SBCA are used for formative versus summative purposes or both, and their impact on teachers and students. And the research can also investigate students' engagement into different forms of SBCA. Research is also needed to examine the use and impact of carefully implemented classroom assessment in systematic ways. The increasing interest in various forms of SBCA affords the opportunity to conduct experimental studies that examine specific characteristics of the various assessment and assessment practices, and the extent to which the information they provide and the decisions that are made on the basis of the information serve to accomplish the intended purpose, whether it be informing teachers, increasing student motivation, or improving student learning. Careful attention to assessment purpose will be critical in any validity investigation that focuses on SBCAs. These assessments can serve a number of functions, including assigning grades, monitoring progress, helping to plan instruction, predicting future performance, and enhancing student learning. Studies need to examine the expertise and experience required for teachers to become competent developers and users of SBCAs of English for summative and formative purposes. Research could also investigate the types of professional development that help teachers acquire expertise in both the standards and assessment that would allow them to effectively engage in various SBCA practices. These studies could also examine the extent to which teachers can accurately interpret the information provided by these assessments and determine appropriate instructional strategies to address the gaps in student knowledge. The issues and challenges were discussed in relation to three main components in this article: the teacher, the assessment purpose, and the standards. A fourth component was not addressed in this paper, is the student. The student plays a particularly important role in formative approaches to SBCA that focus on the process of assessment for enabling learning. Hopefully, future US-based research on SBCA of English proficiency will contribute to expand on and learn from the work on ELP standards and assessment around the world. Thank you everyone for watching my presentation. Thank you for your time. I hope you enjoyed my interpretation of the article and my accent as well.